he likes to mix it up a little bit. Maybe, you know, I'm a creature of habit, I don't. Yeah, well, and we have a group kind of sitting behind you, which is even more entertaining. Yeah, well, yeah, well.
Oh, okay.
What?
Muted.
Second. All right.
Oh, I'm ready. Are we ready?
Push the button or don't push the
Hold
button?
on, for a technical bit, you can silence it and it goes red, right? So if you're talking or whatever, tap that button, it'll go red, and that will be your personal cue.
All right, so we are live streaming. We are go. We are not a go. I'm so confused. We're ready, we're not ready. My microphone is too tall. You know, we are kind of spread out, so if you want to walk.
That's good.
That's hard to find. We tried to find out when the sun came up in position to see if the students in that was straight over or not. We couldn't find anywhere to get them because they were all, I mean, it was tests for like if you're positive, but it wasn't antibody.
We're good to start.
We're good? All right, welcome everybody. Sorry for our late start, technical issues. We actually were ready at 5, but we're now going to start our meeting and officially call it to order. Today is Tuesday, October 19th, 2021. Let's start by indicating who's here with Clark.
Clark Nelson.
Chris Wynn.
Connie Burgess.
Nicole McDermott.
Julie Jackson.
Terry Bunn. Rich Nye.
And Karen Winder. All right, welcome to our study session. This is a little bit unique in that study sessions, often we just study the issues and they're informational and where we get into in-depth discussion about certain programs or anything like that. This one's unique in that we have 3 action items that will require a vote this evening at the end of our discussion. So the first one is construction fiscal updates and approval. And Don Adams and Justin Nagel will be leading us in this. Now, prior to me handing it over, let me just say a couple words. We know that there is I know that there's a lot of passion, a lot of questions, a lot of concerns with the price tag of some upcoming projects and existing projects especially. Board, I would ask a couple things of you tonight. We have 7 slides to get through. Let's let them get through them. Hold your questions. If you need to jot down a question, type it in your phone. Remember what slide it's on. Whatever you need to do to remember your question, because we want to for sure come back to them. But there is an opportunity or a challenge of getting down too many rabbit holes before we get through the slide deck. So let's let the presentation happen. Save your questions till the end. I promise we will allow enough time and you can write your clarifying questions. We can flip back to whatever slide you have the question on. I think that will be the best way to approach this. And then once we open it up for discussion, the decorum will be that, just wait till you're called on. Let's make sure everyone has a chance to speak. And then we'll have a thorough discussion. So with that, we'll turn the time over to Dawn.
thank you. As you mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about capital projects, construction escalations. Of course, Justin, our Director of Architecture, Engineering, and Construction is here as part of that. And then for other specific questions, we have Aaron Youngberg. He's one of our architects on our project, and Dave Hart from MoCA, who is an owner's rep. And so we've tried to bring with us a team that could answer the intricacies of the questions in a very complex situation that we're facing. And by the way, this is not just a local conundrum. This is a global conundrum. And so we're being impacted by a lot of items. And if you wouldn't mind, Ben, can we put up the slide deck, please?
Sorry.
No, you're just fine. Thank you. Okay. Great. Thank you. So on tonight's agenda, what we're going to try and encapsulate is some historic cost escalations. We'll bring you back to the high school November 2019 estimates. We'll show you how we've tried to model cost increases, and then we'll take you through some cost summaries. And you guys have all seen this ahead of time, so I apologize if there's some redundancy here, but again, we'll try and cover it best we can. So we're here to inform the Board of Education on construction costs and what I'm going to call the recent cost escalations. And this is really a 2 to 3 year look back on what's been happening in the industry. So if we go back to 2016, we've been noticing a lot of volatility in our cost estimates. A lot of these have been related to labor market shortages. There are just not a lot of electricians, plumbers, and et cetera out there to be had, specifically in our market. And that's impacted by other markets throughout the country, but also age of employees, interest in the construction trade has waned historically. And so we're starting to see some labor shortages that are impacting us. And I do recall that we've been talking about labor shortages now pointedly for at least the last 12 to 18 months. One of the first questions that Clark Nelson asked us was, well, what do you see as a hindrance? What do you see as a liability? What are your unknowns as we were looking at Westlake and some other items? And I spoke directly to the unknown labor market. It is shrinking. It is a challenge. And so we know we've been talking about that. Material costs, some of that is associated with normal cost escalations. Going back to 2016, there was tariffs and unknowns on how the industry would handle those. And most recently, supply chain issues. We've all been probably hearing plenty of that on the news, looking around at our local stores, et cetera, and understanding that supply chain is an issue. We do know that our local market conditions have outpaced national trends due to growth. We're in a high growth state that is compounding all of the issues that we're speaking to. Later on, what we'll say is we only decided to show maybe the last decade of our index chart, but it did stretch back to 2000. So 2000 is the base year. And you'll see that as we get into the next slides. And of course, we are seeing some double-digit growth. We're actually estimating this year a 10% growth, but there have been some indications looking at third and fourth quarter numbers that it could be up to a 13% growth. And that variability will come into play as we discuss a little bit later what options or alternatives might be. So this is a summary. This is data that we've collected from multiple sources, but primary sources have been Construction Control Corporation. They're a cost estimating type firm, Jacobson Construction, and Granite School District's own experiences. So we've tried to coalesce this data, really looking from 2010 to 2021. And of course, you'll see a percentage, an indice that's on the low side, and then the upper index. Why the range? Because when you're getting data from multiple sources, not everybody agrees. But within the range, we're starting to see some clarity of what's happening. So you'll see us refer to this range over the next couple of slides. But in essence, paying attention that we've seen 0% growth back in the recessionary period, all the way up to some double-digit growth that we're seeing now. And I guess I would say that depending upon the indice, depending upon the month, depending upon the market segment you're looking at, you can see growth factors that are higher than this. We tried to narrow it down to the K-12 industry, right? That's very important, that we're our own product type of construction. We have certain codes that we have to follow. We do things certain ways because of those codes. And not everybody follows that. For example, homes use lumber, so they're on a completely different construction industry indice than we are. The materials we use are different. So a commercial shopping center is built differently than us, et cetera. But higher ed and K-12 really seem to reflect this band of construction escalation that we're referencing today. Yes, sir?
Can I just ask a quick question to make sure I understand the index as it's presented? If something cost $100 in the base year of 2000, it's expected to cost $255 on the low end of the index in
That is correct.
2021. Is that fair?
What the indice is doing is just compounding that interest that you see off to the side.
Right. I just wanted to put it into real dollars, and that's
Real dollars.
just wanted to make sure.
Yep, that's what we're seeing. So again, that's a great point, that the indice is a multiplier over years, so it's compounding on itself. Again, going back to the specific impacts on our high school construction, when we came to the board in November of 2019, we had estimates that were about $127 million for Cypress, or pardon me, for Skyline, and $145 for Cypress. At that point in time, we were seeing predictions from construction indices that were suggesting that the market would experience a slowdown, that they would start to normalize the volatility of the tariff market as we get into, remember, we're projecting out the completion of these projects into 2024, 2025, et cetera. And the crystal ball back then said, you know what, you're probably going to see some slowing. They didn't know about a forthcoming pandemic, and that really changed everything very quickly. And so we went from presumptive 3 or 4% annual escalations, high single digits, low double digits. That's what we're seeing, and that will come into play as we work this through. Those cost escalations really have been rapid and unpredictable in the last 2 to 3 years. As a matter of fact, it changes quarterly for us. A bid from this summer is substantially different than a bid projected this November or December. A lot of folks are saying that they're seeing substantial market jumps on a weekly, bi-weekly kind of basis. We've had electrical subcontractors put out bids that 1 week it's good, the next week material costs have gone up 15% from their supplier. So we're trying to watch this in real time, and it's not easy. It doesn't always make intuitive sense, but these are the indicators that we're getting from real folks on the ground doing real bidding. It really is important for us to acknowledge those type of things, because they are impacting the accuracy of our predictions. We're not as good as we were a decade ago. We're just not. The volatility and complexities of supply chain hits, complexities of reactions to pandemics, complexities of reactions to labor shortages really have us with a cloudy crystal ball. So as we engage in this discussion tonight, this historic look back is really helping us better understand the recent bids, because in the heat of the moment, we may not be, well, I will tell you, we're not as good as we want to be. Our construction estimating companies that we rely upon are not as good as they want to be. So I will try and speak specifically to how the indice and the look back helps us understand Cypress High School. So one of the important differentiators is that Cypress is on a clean site. The costs or bids do not, they do reflect a construction process that is more seamless, that is not impacted by maintaining school operations. It's, you start and you progress, and you don't have to worry about outside influences impacting one area or the other of your site. You own it, you control it, you monopolize it, and you go through as efficiently as you can. It does reflect mass grading needed to accommodate the site and the vertical construction. So in there, we show you an earthwork cost that was our mass grading. We tried to do that to normalize it or equalize it to what you're seeing on the Skyline bid, because their earth package is included in their number. So we felt, since we did that early, because of soil conditions and the need to settle the site, it needed to be reflected in tonight's conversation. Okay. The other major difference is that we're not reflecting demolition of existing facilities. Because Cypress is at its own site and it will be handled in the future, whether the board decides to reuse that site or surplus it and do the demolition, that's a to be realized cost that we can't predict, and therefore we have not put it in this model. Now, if we take a look using 2 years worth of the indice on this chart, you'll see that the lower indice yields about a $169 million cost estimate. And that's our look back, where we can say, hey, we've now seen construction trends and predicted this one out. Yeah, it's up there, 169 million. The high end of that is 173 million. And so our bid has come in the middle at roughly 170.6 million for the project. So it is higher, substantially higher than the prediction from November of 2019. But again, through the lens of history, it normalizes. Unfortunately, it's what the market is telling us construction will be. We've also kind of wondered about, well, is this a Granite exclusive, or is this other districts seeing it kind of look? And so we've reached out to Weber District, for example, and they have a bond going, and they use a lot of the same architects and estimators and et cetera that we do. And they're seeing about the same, they are predicting the type of numbers that we're realizing. So their elementary schools, let's say we built our most recent last year, and let's say they're 30 million, they're predicting their models in 2 years, a year away and 2 years away, at 37 million. Okay, yeah, that's what everybody's seeing and experiencing in the market. The same can be said for their high school. Their high school is smaller than ours. It's not holding the population. It's a new build on a new site, and they're predicting 157 million for a smaller building without a pool, by the way. That's a big differentiator. We build pools. So there's $3 or $5 million extra dollars in that, right? So when you start to try and get apples to apples, I'm going to tell you we can get a Granny Smith and compare it to a Fuji. That's about as close as we're getting, because everybody's unique. But they are within a range that says our bidders are reflecting market conditions, the indice is reflecting market conditions, we're in a range. That's as close as we seem to be able to get right now as we dialogue with our counterparts, as we look at construction indices and what we're seeing in construction. So hopefully that makes sense, that we're in a historic look back, we're able to do all of this with a heck of a lot better accuracy than 2 years away. In this market, it's been very sad. The next series, we'll talk specifically about some of the lessons learned from Skyline. That's where these individuals who are managing those projects more closely are your best information resource. I've been managing the Cypress resource a little closer. So if you will, I'll continue to click through, but these gentlemen are the best position to answer some of those questions.
Okay, thank you. So for Skyline, again, as Mr. Adams mentioned, you've seen this, but and he's actually mentioned some of these things already, but the Skyline cost bids reflect construction process complicated with existing site. We have the water easement that runs right through our site, and we have other things. For instance, just today I learned that we have a 6-inch water line, 6 6-inch water line that runs through north, south, little east, through our softball field, our current softball field, where our softball field was, and there's no recorded easement. We met with the utility company today, and they not only are asking, we need to lower that to get the new softball field in. It's not recorded anywhere. So we aren't even talking about that cost yet, but there will be a cost that we have to lower a water line that was not earmarked, and we don't, nor does the water company, have an easement, which we're going to have to generate and figure that out. They want us to we need to lower a bit, and they want us to reroute it a little bit, and so we'll work together. But one of those complexities that nobody had any knowledge of, that predates anybody on this up here on the stand, that we don't know what happened going back 10, 12 years ago, and then even longer ago than that with this. That's just one example of a water line that runs and serves our neighbors to the north down in the little ravine down there. So that just, another complexity on the site that seems to jump up. Mr. Adams mentioned the complexity factor that we put in there, the 12%. But as he mentioned, demolition is something that we have to face, abatement we have to face on this project. And the operational costs that we have to maintain to keep the existing pool, the existing auditorium, those, and now our new relos, those all have got to be maintained while we're in the process of juggling buildings, building a new building, tearing down the old building, then moving kids, the whole process. It starts and stops. What did we figure today? At least 5 different times. And so it's not in start, ready, go, and get done in 3.5 years, right? This is a start, stop repeatedly, and it does cause the level of complexity is much higher in that kind of environment, and the costs reflect that as well. I mentioned the complexity factor there. You can see that the places the bids in excess of our projections, and as the bottom bullet point is indicated there. We not only believe, but it's evidence, and you can see the numbers, that we underestimated the complexity of that site. As an example, on the bids that we did receive for Skyline that we're talking about today, Herm Hughes, the construction company, in the process that we're involved with, which is called CMGC, but they solicited bids. And you can't, as you can imagine, go out and make an electrical company bid your work. You can advertise, you can beg, you can say, hey, we've worked together for 5 years or 50 years, are you guys gonna, but you can't make them. And multiple bids and phases of parts of the bid, they didn't receive more than 1 or sometimes only 2 bids. And we had to work through procurement with Jared on that in our purchasing department. But the point is, not everyone is anxious to run and jump and do a high school that's 6 years out, that is extremely complex, that has multiple phases, that starts and stops, that has kids on site, patrons on site. It's not the ideal construction project. In this industry, they can go do other work a lot easier, get paid a lot quicker, turn it around, and be in and out, if you will. So that is a real element that we're facing, and it's proven by the fact that even in our bids, we didn't get. Usually when we bid something like this, we would see 6 or 7 electrical bids, or 5 or 6 mechanical bids for plumbing or HVAC, and we didn't see that. Yeah, please.
And I can speak to the Cypress bid as well. They were only receiving on a clean site bid 1 or 2 subcontractor bids as well. So the depth, depending upon the trade specific, can be a very, very shallow pool. Sometimes you're very lucky in specific trades, or you can get 3, 4, 5 bids. But in this labor shortage market, we're finding that depth of subcontractors is not where it has been historically. So understanding that we're seeing that trend industry-wide, and it's not our favorite trend to deal with.
And nothing unethical, but it's well known in the community, right? If you're in the electrical business and you have an electrical company, your competitors if they're bidding on that. Skyline and Cypress are enormous projects. Weaver High is an enormous project. Those are big ones that people either do or don't go after, but who's going after that. I know that Julie's not going to go after that project, right? So if I know that she's out and I know somebody else is tied up somewhere else, what does that tell me? And it's not unethical, but it maybe some of that competitive fighting with sharpening your pencil, making those bids even tighter, is laxed a little bit because they know the competition isn't necessarily there. So anyway, it's not unethical. It's just simply the facts that it's not, in our favor right now to bid projects, big or small, and these ones are enormous. And you can see that, oh, go ahead.
So do you want me to put that?
Yeah, I think so. You can see the bottom line there. We're at 173 at right now, which we're going to talk about Skyline. And then the last slide we have, and thank you for being patient until we get through these, is a breakdown. I thought this was helpful for you to see that this is a breakdown of the essentially the four phases that we have bid at Skyline, the three previous ones. And I say three because 0 is the CMGC fees and bonds supervision. But the first one was the baseball, which we've completed. You see that number up there, the $3 million. Then the athletics building, which we have started and will be finished this summer. Julie and I were able to tour through there and see that a week and a half ago-ish, 2 weeks ago. And then the site bid that was May of 20, Aaron, the site package. At 17 million. And then of course we knew that the last phase, the academics, which includes the main classroom building, the offices, the cafeteria, the new auditorium, black box, drama and oral rooms, was going to be the largest chunk, and that's the 97 right there, which brings us to the 173. So
Can you
that,
clarify?
yes, please.
The GMP, clarify what all of those acronyms are.
Oh, sure. Okay, so like a number one baseball, that's BP's bid package. So that's what BP stands for. And then the GMP is the gross maximum price, right? So that's what they, as the CMGC contractor, says, hey, we will build that phase that Aaron and his team put together drawings. We can build that guaranteed at this price, right? And then there's an incentive in there. If they can do it for less, there's some savings there. Well, that's one of the things we try to work with them. And then those savings are rolled over. In fact, we did roll over savings from baseball into the next phase of the site. So that's what GMP stands for. Does that help, Nicole? Were there others out there that you had a question on? Okay. So that's our seven slides, and to talk about kind of where we're at. And I know we're here, you've already voted on the Cypress one, but this is the Skyline package. And I will tell you one other thing, and that is, Don was mentioning earlier, working with Herm Hughes Construction on this, they experienced some things they hadn't experienced before, where the subcontractors submitted their bid and said, here's our number to do garage doors, here's our number to do concrete, whatever it is. And they would put exclusions in there. This includes everything but a lot of them said these bids are only good for 30 days. Our contract says that they have to be good for 60 days, so we have a chance to go to you as the board and get approval and go through the paces that it takes to do that. But they wrote in there 30 days because in their industry, right, they're a little panic-stricken too with seeing what's going on with not only labor shortages, but materials and shipping and being able to get their hands on materials, what the material is going to cost me today versus next week or versus 2 months from now. So they put 30 days, which put us in a little bit of a bind, and we had to push back a little bit with Hughes and Aaron and Mocha were helpful on this, helping them understand, look, if we've got to get some of this going. The still package had to get ordered, and so we've done that under the 127, but we knew we couldn't exceed the 127 that you all approved 2 years ago until we had this meeting. But they are anxious to hear if we're going to go forward because they need to release those. They're very nervous about prices and currently where the trends are leading. And that's interesting. We've never seen them say 30 days only. Well, again, sorry to ramble, but this meeting was going to be past 30 days, and so we had to call them and say, look, we're going to the board on whatever today is, the 19th. Can you give us a few more days so the board can have a chance to vet this and discuss it and vote on it? But, give us a few more days. And most of them were willing to work with us. There were some that weren't and said, no, thank you. We just don't feel comfortable with that. And that's their choice. And then Herm Hughes has to look at who was the second guy or second company and figure that out. So it is a crazy, crazy world right now. And that's why we're here, unfortunately.
All right, thank you, board, for, thank you, Justin and Don, first of all. And I'd like to thank our guests here from Mocha and, remind me. Elevate. I always forget that, sorry about that. hear the field questions. All right, I know there are a lot of questions and concerns by board members. I think we're all kind of in sticker shock. I think the board is, I know the administration is as well. I'm sure our guests are. And so with that, we can now open it up for questions and discussions. Who wants to go first? Julie.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I've actually got a list of a few questions, but I'll only ask one at a time unless you'd rather I did something else. You've got the GMP up there. I just want to make sure. So that means that when we approve this 173, 736, whatever, those are finalized numbers? Because in my mind, for 4 years, it seems like that's a really hard, I see this industry changing dramatically in 4 years. So I'm not sure what that GMP means because of the volatility of the market. Can you explain that?
That's a great question. So there's a couple of things at play. I've learned a lot in the last few weeks from our attorney and others in the last couple of months, actually. There's a term called force majeure. Maybe you're familiar with it. I was not, and I learned that, and please jump in if I start to go down the wrong path, but we've talked with our attorney, Matt Anderson, and he's actually taken a class to learn more about this. Force majeure is something that wasn't used a lot, but is now becoming more commonly used. And in essence, a contractor or a vendor can claim force majeure on something that is out of their control, is an act of God. For instance, a lot of them are claiming COVID, right? COVID is a force majeure clause that they can push and say, even though we had a guaranteed maximum price, or in a traditional hard bid, when you just, like we did with Cypress, it was contractors bid it, we get that number and we're done, that's the number. But they can come back on force majeure and say, but this was out of our control, we can't control that. We're dealing with one right now as an instance from the winter storms of January of this last year down in the Gulf Coast area, and it's dealing with plastics, and all plastics right now are hard to get. They've limited the amount of plastics that vendors can get. There was a number that we were reported, I don't remember that number was, Aaron, but like 1/25 of what you used to be able to get previous years, you can get this year. Well, if you're going to limit the amount of plastics you can get, then of course it drives the demand up, right? And so they've come back on the plastic lockers that we're putting in the pool area, not throughout the school, but just in the pool area. And right now we're looking at, they've proposed a $9,000 change order, or $7,000 change order under force majeure clause, that they couldn't control the weather in the Gulf Coast, which caused these other spiraling effects, and now all of a sudden we're limited on the amount of petroleum and thus the plastics that we can get. And so yeah, sorry, Dave, did you want to speak to that?
Oh, I thought you did. Did I misread you?
Well, if you want to finish your comment.
I was just going to say, and so we're dealing with that. That's the first one that's been presented to us, and we're having our attorney look at that and say, look, is this really, in a court of law, are we going to lose this battle? Is this really force majeure, or is this just somebody saying it's convenient to make this claim? So a long answer to you is, yeah, we are also very uncertain of what is happening. We're trying as hard as we can to say, are you in with both Westland Construction, who's going to do Cypress under a hard bid, and now Hughes that's doing Skyline. We've had those discussions about what have you done we get it, you're in this to make money, you're a contractor, what have you done to assure yourself that you're good with these numbers, that you're not going to come back to us and say, yeah, that was a year ago, but now, whatever. And we hear the standard stuff that we've heard for years. Well, we've taken precautions, and we've got contingencies in place, and this and that. But
if I may, a GMP is a guaranteed maximum price, and it's based on the drawings or the scope of work that Aaron has put together with Elevate. If they make a mistake, or if they leave something out, or there is a hole or an error, then the contractor has every right to come back and ask for more money, and that is a change order. The contractor, within the numbers that you saw earlier, where it said CMGC fees, bonds, and supervision, they usually have a line item in there also for contingency. And their contingency, they're allowed to use that to fill gaps or holes within their GMP. So let's say that they have gone through and they've estimated some things, and there is some items in there that they're not going to purchase right away. One of the hedges that a contractor can use within a GMP is to go out and buy out the job as quickly as they can, sign up all of the suppliers and sign up all of the subcontractors and lock in those prices. Then what they do is they shift the risk from themselves and from the owner to the subcontractor or the supplier. Now, if there are holes that they see, or if there are issues that they see that they can't get a change order for, because we try to work with them, so if there is, for example, a drain and a pipe over here, but for some reason his mechanical engineer left out a pipe, we can argue that that was reasonably to infer. And so that pipe, he doesn't get any additional for it. And so he would then use his contingency to pay for that. So that's one way he protects himself. The other way he protects himself is he tries to then push things down to his subs, and then his subs also have within their number a certain amount of contingency. And so there's these contingencies that are built up within the numbers. And so when they come in, we try and look at all of those pricing. We try to understand who has contingency, who doesn't, and how they're going to use that. And so when we sign the contract for the guaranteed maximum price, they are at risk for that price. Unless we run into like something that is unforeseen, like this pipe, or Aaron makes a mistake, those are really the only areas they can get a change order on.
So for example, in the earlier slides, it showed that there's projected to be a 10% increase in this industry. In my mind, I'm saying a 10% increase is 17 million on this, you know, and do I need to expect that? Is that something that they would consider under the contingency because of COVID? I know in the past it would not. Right. But what do you think about that?
So we are seeing more and more clauses today all across the country writing in a clause that tries to shift the risk from them on COVID back to the owner. There is usually some form of a negotiation that takes place with regards to, is it really a COVID type force majeure type of event, or is it just inflation that you didn't see coming? And so you have to get into the nitty-gritty of whether or not it is just inflation that he should have thought about when he bid the job and took the risk, or is it really something that is unforeseen and unusual that is happening, such as a pandemic? And then you have to kind of sort out those issues. And there aren't any easy answers, but the one thing is that just because the index goes up, it doesn't mean the contractor's price goes up. He locks that in, and he's at risk for that for the entire job. So the reality is when you have a job as complicated as Skyline, where you've got 4 phases with multiple sub-phases under each one, you're tearing things down in 5 different phases over the course of 6 years, he has to put into his bid enough contingency, let's call it, or guess estimating to try to be competitive in the marketplace against his other bidders or other competitors, as well as being able to take that risk. And so there is probably a margin in there that he's trying to bank on, and he's at risk for that.
You know, just real quick, the other thing that both contractors have done is they've gone out and either secured or have money in the bid for a warehouse to store materials, so they can order things that they may not need for 3. At Skyline, we're talking 5 years down the road, right? They may not need those finishing touches for 5 years, but let's get them ordered now at today's dollar and store them somewhere, unless it's technology, which we don't want until right towards the end. But so both have done that so that there's ability, or they can bring those big shipping connexes and log things in there that they can store materials. So that's another way to help mitigate that risk, so that we've got the materials and also don't not have delays in the shipping process that we're seeing right now as well.
So I think the bottom line of my question is, should I be expecting that this is actually, I'm going to have another change order? Not change order, I mean, not a change order. I mean, will there be a moment where, you know, I realize this is actually going to cost me 200 million and not 175 or 73?
So just speaking kind of construction-wide at the district, we have a track record of having change orders, and I'm going to define that as change orders not related to the owner changing the scope, wanting something more or new or different or bigger in the middle of the process. We hold that to 1% or 2% of the total project, right? So those errors and omissions that were talked about, et cetera. So when we're showing you a hard bid price on Cypress, do we think we could see 1% or 2% in change orders? We do. I think that would be a GMP conversation with Skyline that is the same. So we're trying to say the contractor has given us this number. Our history has proven that we can stay within 1% or 2% of that unless we tell them to go do something bigger, better, different. And then all bets are off at that stage. But we believe the plan sets are well developed that unless something comes at us that we as an administrative team are not aware of, they'll build it that way.
Okay.
Julie, the base assumption on this conversation is that we've directed the construction manager to bid the project, and it's going to go on for another, 5 years. And we've said, give us a number that'll take us all the way through that process. And so it's not a moving number. And they've expressed some frustration of the challenge of trying to bid that far out, but we've told them to do that, and that number shouldn't be changing just because time goes by.
Okay, thanks.
Can you help me understand then and forgive my lack of technical terminology, what is the difference between what has been bid and is now proposed to be ratified by the board tonight and what I perceive to be a redo of what was done in 2019, which was for $127 million? To your point just now, which is we're asking them to bid this out, isn't that what we asked them to do 2 years ago?
No. So 2 years ago, we were in the process of estimating and doing the design work. So the scope had not been finalized. And we were still looking at the design process. So the design process was still going on. We had not we had not asked them to bid the work to any subcontractors or suppliers. And so we were working off of estimates. And estimates, as you know, are the best information you've got at the time. And if the drawings are only 50% done, then you're only getting 50%. And you try to guesstimate where the other 50% is going to go. What we have done this time, and the reason this is different, is because we have actually taken the drawings that are now complete and we have put those out into the marketplace, and the marketplace has bid those so that the general contractor has bid the steel to the steel providers and installers and manufacturers, to the plumbers, to the electricians, and to everybody else, brought all those numbers together, put together their information, said we can build it for this price for the next 5 or 6 years. And so that is their guaranteed maximum price, where before we had an estimate. So that's really the difference, is now we have a bid that we can rely on, where before it was an estimate.
Are we through with the design phase?
We are.
Skyline, the design phase has taken on many faces and many different phases. So you're telling me we're done and we're going forward?
We are done, and as long as we don't get direction anywhere else, we are, the design is complete.
What do you mean direction from anywhere?
Just as long as we don't, like Don was saying, sometimes in general, the owner says, oh, we don't really want that size, we need it bigger, and then we got to change, right? But as long as we don't start changing things, yes, the design is done.
But we have changed things as the community has gotten involved and stuff like that. You're telling me, though, we're done, Don?
Yes, the design was complete roughly 2 months ago, and that's where the bid documents were generated, and that's what the subcontractors have done. As far as once we get approval on a project, we're going to say we're done and we're going to go execute. That's our job now, is to execute on the drawings that were issued and bid upon 2 months ago. We're in what we would consider an execution phase, yes.
And regarding that, oh, sorry, Terry.
Go ahead.
And regarding that, you touched on the community feedback. Skyline has had for those listening, they've had a community council of members that actually are very knowledgeable in the construction industry. And there's been a lot of back and forth. And I think it has not always gone smoothly. We have to own that. But I do think right now, speaking to the design that we currently have, there's been a lot of compromise and there's been a lot of work between the district, the board. I've sat in several different meetings with a lot of these community council members providing feedback. And you know, they're invested in this and they're probably listening in. And so the nice part of the bad part is the price. The nice part where we are is we have a design where I feel like all parties, we've come to, and Julie, this is your area, so, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but my sense is we're finally to a place where all parties can say, you know, we've got a good design here.
Yeah, my sense with the building committee is that they're happy with moving forward with the design. And they aren't, I have not heard them making any requests to change the design in any way. So I feel like we're all on the same page and want to move forward at this point.
Can I ask a question to piggyback off Clark?
Well, I guess, is it Mocha? Is that you, sir? What are your responsibilities in this design and building of this building? And Cypress also, as I understand it, is that right?
Well, during the design, thank you for the question. During the design phase, we work with the architect and the owner to kind of ferret through the different design elements and try to keep track of where the cost and the schedule is going, and try to work with the general contractor, especially in a GMC, to try to make sure that they're up to speed and they're understanding what is going on. During the construction phase, we're on site either every day or 2 or 3 times a week, depending on the job and how it's moving forward. And we will do daily reports and we'll observe to make sure the project is going together the way the architect has drawn it, and that it's consistent with the information in the plans and the specifications. When we see something that doesn't conform, we work with the contractor to make that change and make sure that the owner, you, are getting what you are paying for.
So have you been with us from the very beginning?
We've been actually with you from before we hired the architects and the contractors. We did the initial RFP to select the architects and the contractors. We then sat in the selection process with that and provided our recommendations. And we'll be with you to the end.
Okay, thank you.
Clark, I've seen you grab your mic a couple times.
Can you clarify for me, what is the student population that this building is being built for?
2,400 is the design load for this building. 3,000 is the design load for Cypress. We will say that when we do design load, it does not reflect the absolute maximum the building can carry. There are things that administrators can do to add more students and do et cetera. But it's kind of our best programming guidance. We look at a target population and estimate necessary square footage per student based upon minimum codes, based upon activities that are undertaken at the school, et cetera.
And so with 2,400 as the target, what is the maximum capacity then that's estimated for the Skyline building?
I'm going to reference a little bit of Granger, maybe to give an example. Granger is a 440,000 square foot high school. The early design targets for programming that school really mentally came in 2,800 to 3,000. So let's call it 3,000. That school right now has just shy of, I think, 3,450 students as of October 1. And that's using a fairly traditional block schedule. It's not, they are traveling teachers, for example. That's one methodology to add capacity to a school. Take a room that's teachers on prep period, use that room so we can travel teachers. You can add relocatables, which Granger has done. You could go really crazy and start talking flex mod schedules and pivoting kids in left, right, and center. So I don't want it to sound like I can't give you an answer, but I will tell you, depending upon how you want to master schedule your school, you can flex, right? Right now, I would say that Granger, with a design of 2,900 to 3,000 kiddos, is about as maxed out as you can make it in that 34 to 3,500 kiddo range. And that's with, and I'm going to eyeball Steve Hogan in the back, 7 relocatables, Steve? 8 or 9. Okay,
It's
so-
more than that. They've got a little relo village
Yeah,
behind.
8 or 9 to flex up
And
to that
it
number.
is crowded.
Yeah, it's very crowded. So with
Which we had the year after the building was finished.
Yeah,
You know,
we've seen
just
population increase every year at that school. So again, depending on how you do it, right? And I don't know if I want to complicate it more by going back to what used to happen in the 70s. But in the 70s, you ran a more homogeneous, regimented schedule, and you weren't individualizing education for students as much, and you could have more kids. We don't do that anymore. It's not best for kids. So understand, you can get a couple hundred more on top of what the architects set as their holding capacity in their design concept.
I was just looking for an order of magnitude in terms of going from 2,400 to, is it, and I get it, there's all those flex points that create that variability, but again, I'm just looking for an order of magnitude. Should I have in my mind?
5 to 10% on top of a design capacity, I don't believe is unreasonable to ask of a building and their building administration.
So
And I'm going to
27.
look around to my building administrators in the room to double check me on that, but 5 to 10% seems reasonable.
So 2,700, give or, from an estimate, just again, order of
You
magnitude.
probably could.
Thank you.
All right, Chris.
Okay, so to follow up on Clark's question, what's our estimated student enrollment for Skyline in the future? I mean, we've kind of went through Davis demographics to get our predictions, and I didn't see a huge growth in that area. So is this building bigger than we need? Learning from Granger that maybe we needed a little bigger high school, or is this consistent with where student population's going in that area?
Sure. And I think the best thing for us to do is take you back to, and many of you were not here, take you back to the November 2019 conversation. And that analysis was showing that Skyline's enrollment diversity is substantial, because you have roughly 50% of the student population coming from in Skyline boundary. You have about 25% additional of that population coming from within Granite District from other schools. They have a program or a desire to be at that school, and so they'll come in from any one of our neighborhoods. And then you have an out-of-district population of 20 to 25% that are not in our district boundaries. And so it depends on what you're seeing. Davis demographics is really showing, I think, student generation rate stable in the greater Skyline community. The population has aged out, they've regentrified, and they're coming back at what they're coming back at. So I'm not expecting at Skyline to see super high growth. Since you represent the Cypress community, it's a chance to highlight that it's a different conversation in the Cypress area. There's a lot of new growth potential based upon availability of land, be it in the existing community, Kennecott releases, or et cetera. So we do expect a population growth in the Cypress community, and we're counting on that with our enrollment projections and our design.
Thanks. Nicole.
I just wanted to circle back just so that I can understand, and maybe everybody listening in. So when we went through this November 2019 with the estimates, I thought, this is just, I'm not educated on this, but I thought we had pretty much everything done. Was the architecture design not done? Why has it taken us 2 years to get this? And why didn't we bid it out then?
Sure.
Not now?
Sure. So both schools were in 2019, November 2019, were in what we call schematic design phase, right? It shows the general size and shape of the building, the square footages associated with rooms, hallways, cafeterias, et cetera. What it doesn't have is the nuts and bolts detail that show the size of a roof truss, the and how many tons each roof truss is projected to weigh. It doesn't show the exact size and dimension of a footing or a foundation to know how much concrete and rebar needs to take place. And so the team, imagine if you will, on a very complex high school, is designing every electrical system, every plumbing system, every structural system once you get done with schematics. And so when Dave Hart was saying, hey, back then 50% of the drawings were done, well, we had to do the detailed next 50%. So the estimates are a projection of what you think is going to be a component of that building and what you believe the structural engineer will say about that wall panel, about that roof truss, what you believe the electrical engineer will say about all of the electrical panels that are in the main electrical distribution system. And as you detail those out and you check your assumptions, in that time frame, the construction industry decided that they needed to reflect market condition changes upward. So we didn't have a drawing to bid, we had a schematic plan to bid.
Don, can I add? Can I add just a little bit to what you said? Back in November of 2019, the mandate from the school district to the design team and to our construction manager was to get this building, this floor plan that had been put in front of you, let's do it for that amount, that $127 million. And that was the expectation put on us. And over the time of being able, at that time we had just gotten out a bid for the baseball field. It was the first of 4 bid packages. Following that would be the athletics building and the stadium. And then the site came after that. And then the last 2/3 of the building itself was completed a couple months ago. As time went by, it became apparent that it just wasn't, if we were going to stay within that $127 million project, it would mean not building an auditorium, that whole last third of the building. Just we could get 2/3 of the building in for that price. And it's the market forces at work. And it's something that we try and keep in mind as we're doing this, and we're designing things and we're talking about as we go along. All right, what can we do to save money and not, get rid of the band room? Things that we know we can't do. And we went through these processes of trying to figure out, what can we pare back on? What can we do systemically? Less expensive light fixtures and things like that. We just, in the process of getting Cypress and Skyline done, we were seeing just a lot of escalation of costs for construction materials, and that's the best answer we can give you.
If I may, if you look at the price difference, sorry about the feedback, a good majority of that increase is escalation and complexity factor. And we had tried to take into account the complexity factor that we knew of or we understood at the time we were looking at it. But as we got into it and we started to realize, well, we're going to cut the gym and the cafeteria in half, and we're going to keep the auditorium. And we're going to make this adjustment, and then we're going to come back and tear that down. We started to look at the additional impacts, or we started to see the additional impacts of the complexity factor. And so if you roll into that 127 number, and I think if we go to the last slide, it's pretty clear. Not the last, but the second to last. If you look at that slide, you can start to understand that from 127 to 148, that is all pretty much escalation that is hit. Then you take and you move that to the 169. That is pretty much the escalation and the, or 165, that is pretty much the, I'm sorry, I just lost the complexity factor on top of that. And so a good portion of what we're seeing is really the unknown pandemic impacts and the supply chain issues. as well as the growing or the growth or the impact of the complexity factor. And so, yeah, honestly, we probably missed how complex this was going to be with the multiple demolitions and multiple phases. And that is something that we wish we would have had a better insight into and would have understood better. But as the project developed from schematic design and went through more adjustments, we had to continue to look at those things. So that's the best answer I can give you.
My follow-up question to that is, as a new board member, relatively speaking, I ask this question of myself as much as I do everyone else in the room, but how is it that this is such a surprise to us when there's been 2 years that have passed by chronologically in terms of your processes of realizing that, wow, we've got to cut, or how can we cut, or we can't build an auditorium under these circumstances. I just, we use the term sticker shock, and there's plenty of it here. So why are we 2 years past the 2019 cost estimate, and this is really the first that we're learning of these challenges as a board?
So in 2000, if you go back and you look at the indices, in 2019 and 2020, the escalation was relatively consistent. It was a little higher, and we took that into account. But just for example, in March or in May of 2021, which is when the world started to go crazy, soft lumber went from up 20.6% in 1 month, or 154% for 1 year. That's unprecedented. You look at petroleum, it's gone up 12.8% or 186%. And all of those have impacts on trucking and delivery to site. So I guess the point is that we were surprised come May, June, July of this year when the project is bidding that we're seeing these unprecedented numbers. And we're not just seeing them here. We do work all across the United States. And we're seeing it in California, where it's almost double, in some cases triple-digit inflation. And we're seeing it in other parts of the country, in Minnesota, in Texas, in Florida. This is a result of things that are beyond the control of a lot of people. Now, is there profit-taking going on? I'm sure there is. Whenever you have a crisis, you never want to let a good crisis go to waste, right? And so there are certain people out there that are trying to take advantage, but that's why we go through a bidding process, because you're going to get 1 or 2 people in there that are going to work really hard to get the price down. Now, to your question about did we do value engineering or did we do any cost estimating, we have gone through 4 different value engineering sessions, and that's where you identify ways to save cost and cut the project down. And we listed, I don't know, Aaron, how many in each one of those? Over 30 or 40 different items. And we went through each one as a team, and we identified, can we do this, or should we do this, or shouldn't we do this? And in a good portion of those, the answer came back, if we do that, you're going to reduce the effectiveness and the usability of the building. On some of the other ones, we decided to take those because they weren't going to impact the functionality or the longevity. But I'll give you a good one. For example, on the roof, there was an option to go to a different type of roofing membrane. Granite School District has not had good success with that type of membrane. It lasts a very short period of time. But there was a saving opportunity of some $400,000 with regards to that roofing membrane. We decided that for the good of the district, it was better to get a better roof and spend that additional money because you're getting better value out of that roof for a longer period of time. And so we've tried to look at all of these different things over the course of the last 2 or 3 years as we've been putting this together and being as responsible as possible. Were we surprised in March, April, May when these things started going crazy? Yeah. I think everybody was. If you went and bought a piece of plywood one day and it was $12 and the next day it was $75, I think we were all surprised. And I'm not saying that to be rude, but it was a shock and it was a surprise. And I think we're still seeing it, and we're going to see it. We have an economist that works for us in Florida, and we asked him what his opinion was of where this market was going, because obviously our other clients are struggling with this as well. And he came back and said, we're going to be in this mode until 2024 and maybe 2025. Because the supply chain has been built around just-in-time delivery. And so nobody has warehouses anymore, nobody has parts anymore. Everything comes in and is put on a car or put on a boat or put in a building just when you need it, because they're not warehousing it. So now we've got all this stuff sitting out in the harbor. We've got all these trucks that have got stuff in them, and we can't move them in and out of things. And so what we're finding is that unraveling of that supply chain is going to take a number of years to get results, or to get resolved. And so it's a very complicated situation that we find ourselves in nationally. I wish there was a better answer.
Clark, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that you were addressing the issue of where the market has moved. Clark, I think your question was in reference to the complexity issue.
I would say it's all encompassing.
All of it together.
Yeah, I'm still having a hard time reconciling the surprises that came in this year, but the cost escalations, aren't 2018 compared to 2021 aren't dramatically different. In fact, it's 9.1% in 2018 versus 8% in 2021. So I'm just having a little bit, I get the escalations, I get the surprise of supply chain issues. I'm just having a hard time reconciling that between, we've been working on this for 2 years and kind of known that these escalations were ongoing, and we're moving from 127 to $174 million tonight. If that makes sense.
Well, I think
Just a minute. Rich has been patiently waiting. Can you hold your question?
But it is in relationship to this. I think, and I can't speak exactly to what happened in February, March, April, May, June, to that end. But I think where we, as a board, as administration, have carved out monthly construction updates, some of that, would have been captured had those types of things been occurring. But moving forward, clearly, starting with it last month, the board would be privy to this type of information moving forward. So I see where an issue had occurred. There's some of that surprise. Here we are, where we're at tonight, looking at a significant increase wherein under our current processes with the board and the construction updates, you would be brought along in that conversation.
Well, and to kind of piggyback on that, I think in conversations with board members, I think every single one of us, we are concerned with how change orders have been handled over the past couple of years. And Clark said it, it's just like this number kind of snuck up on us. And so we're the ones to grant the money, and we should not be surprised as the cost escalates. So, because that's part of our job as elected officials, to protect that taxpayer dollar. So, this is related to Skyline and Cypress, don't get me wrong, but I'm talking just structurally moving forward. We need to address, board, as how we want to stay in the loop. We've still got, Skyline's ongoing, Cypress is getting started. We've got a Westlake Junior High rebuild. There's always going to be these massive projects going on because of the bond that was voted through. So to me, the change orders either need to be part of this monthly update, included that we have some kind of a running total in the corner as these change orders add up, so we have a monthly idea of what was projected and how much we're exceeding that by, if any, or if we're just right on track, which hopefully that's it. Or that every change order becomes an action item that's vetted at every board meeting. So those are just some thoughts that I've had in talking with some and with Rich, is we need to have a better structure that these change orders, Connie's over there nodding her head, that these change orders, when they're in the consent agenda, they're nice. We do appreciate, Don, I know you've been instructed to give more of an explanation as to why we need those change orders, but to me, that's great. Not quite good enough, though, because they're not exactly transparent with the public. And so I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, board members, as far as would you like to see them as action items to have a better idea and keep track? Is the monthly update good enough for you? Rich, you feel free to chime in on your end too. What are your thoughts? And now we're just kind of hitting pause on Cypress and Skyline. I realize that we'll come back to their specifics. But I think change order is a lot of part of how we got here and that we're not, it's hard as board members to, I mean, you get those change orders and it's like, where's my spreadsheet keeping track of what this is tallying up to? So I want to come up with a structure that's a little bit better, a lot better, actually, for board members to help track and monitor the progress of these price tags, because ultimately the price comes back to us. Thoughts?
My feeling in general is that that's 100% support for that, and also feel like that is the first step, that we need to, as a board, get together and say, buildings is a new part of what we do all the time, and so we need to have a really strong process that's really tight to make sure that many different areas that we're doing, that we're maximizing financial issues, community feedback issues, issues like about boundaries and population. There are so many different things that it would be great if we really had just like a strong, like we knew the rhythm when we started building, because we were so good at it, you know?
I agree. I would appreciate the updates. I've appreciated the updates so far. They've been really great to see, okay, this is where we're starting, this is where we're going, this is what's, and with the skyline, the complexity factor, I think that's hard to wrap my head around if I don't know what the complexities are, like what exactly the issue was that came up and why was that an issue and how was it unforeseen? And because it happens, already you're saying that pipe. That would be nice to know as an update, because that does affect the total price and that does affect the bottom line. And if we are aware of that in advance, or at least, hey, this has came up, I know I can wrap my head around it a lot better than this big price tag that all of a sudden Skyline's cost projection is higher than Cypress for a smaller school, so that wrapping my head around that has been hard to do with these. But when I see those little, oh, here's what happened here, here's what happened here, that helps me as a board member know, okay, I can see why this is happening.
And understand, just even, I don't know that it needs to be necessarily a lengthy conversation, but just say, like the example you gave with the easement issues and the water, and now we got to bury it and move it, and there's a cost to that. And so as board members, we don't like change orders. We pretty much know that you guys don't either. But if there are those things that need to come out, it would just be really helpful for us. Like Chris said, we can wrap our mind around it better if it's part of a monthly conversation instead of just a big price tag.
We enjoy the regular construction updates. We actually have two types of sheets. We nickname them the green sheet and the yellow sheet. And the green sheet in particular is something that we use daily to track change orders on all projects, et cetera. And we think that that's a great methodology to show as far as the over-unders and what's happening on projects in a monthly report. Like you say, kind of that down in the corner bit, we're just going to bring forth our green sheet that we use as part of our process. And we think that's a very nice way to encapsulate changes.
It does, and that's one thing that Dawn mentioned earlier, is it allows us to see the percentage. Like we have a target that no one wants change orders, but we've never had a project where we haven't had a change order. And so we do try to target that percentage and keep that to the 1 or 1.5% on new build, and it's usually a little higher on a remodel, because those get a little bit hairier and there's unforeseen conditions, an easement issue. We can do that. In fact, Jared Gardner, Director of Purchasing, and I have talked for probably a year about the change orders that come down to the board on the bigger projects, or even on the things over $50,000. But we've said, how does the board understand that there's other change orders that they haven't seen, and that they approved a dollar amount on day one for purchase order of $167,000, but that security project ended up being $200,000. So where's the other $33,000 gone to? And you haven't seen it because it's been change orders less than $50,000. We've talked about that, and I think the best way, as you mentioned, is maybe on that monthly tracking, we can attach a green sheet. It's a lot of information to review, but you can see the running tally of change orders. We also indicate on there, we assign responsibility. Is that a district? Do we own that because we decided we need to have a bigger cable to carry more, data? Or is it because it was unforeseen, or is it because it was a design error? We track that, and then we can deal with those consequences later. But we have that information, and I think we could easily share that so that you have that.
I think we'd appreciate it. Connie, you've been waiting.
That's okay. So, just to help me understand, if we go up to 173 million, if we approve that, then there probably won't be many change orders because it will be within that scope, or can you explain a little bit more and help us understand?
Sure. So again, on both the high school projects that we speak of today, our goal is to keep our change orders to a minimum. Our track record is that percent to percent and a half over that Justin spoke to in new construction. Do we go maybe 1.5%, 2% in remodels? Yes. So when you see the 173.7, yeah, that's within 1% or 2% of where all said and done we believe we're going to come in. So can we say you're not going to see a change order? No, we certainly will say just the opposite. You will see a change order. We'll try and keep those to the minimum. But this unforeseen circumstance that Justin just spoke to, yeah, when the utility doesn't know that they have a utility on your property, my goodness, right? So that's, you will see some. But again, we're going to try and keep it within that margin that we historically have been able to hold to.
Terry, you had a comment?
Yeah, and I agree. I think monthly updates are wonderful, especially in the times in which we're in. Very volatile. Things change daily, hourly. I understand that, so I think that's wonderful. I also feel like we need to realize that anytime you change a design, it takes time, and that costs money. And we as a board have tried to accommodate communities, and I haven't been shy about saying this. I think we've accommodated sometimes too much, and I think that has caused the cost to go up. And I don't think that we were always aware of that as a board, some of the phases and some of the design changes. So I think having that in front of us monthly is also very good. And as a board, we need to realize we want to accommodate our communities and listen to them. But I think it went on too long in some cases, and it's cost time and money. So I feel like I had to say that. But I think as a board, we need to make decisions as to at what point do we just stop and say enough is enough and we need to move forward. Because I think we're seeing escalated costs because maybe it took longer than it needed to. So.
All right, Nicole.
Can I just ask, I know I'm getting into the weeds and it's very nitpicky, but why is Skyline is 440,000 square feet, which is the same as Granger, which you just said, but it's projected only to hold 2,400, where Granger was projected to hold around 3,000. Why is that different?
A lot of this you've seen in the design reflected in student collaboration space. As teaching and learning has changed, we've tried to listen to our district folks and others that are experts in teaching and learning, and they said, hey, we need buildings that give these collaborative environment opportunities for our students. If you go to Granger, very little of that occurs. It's a hallway of 900 square foot classrooms. And so when you add these collaborative environments in, you start to see some square footage growth. A collaboration hub is roughly 3,300 square feet, I think, in our buildings. And so every so often when we put that with a group of 10 classrooms, we've added some square footage that way. These buildings do have more square footage dedicated to probably some common areas. They have a testing center option that added some square footage. those are really the ones that come to mind that show a square footage gain, but it's there to reflect what's best for kids in their ability to learn and in their ability to then come out and understand how we're working as adults in the real world with collaboration, groups that can parse out and not interrupt a class, but can go do their group work and be visible to the teacher and then come back in. All of those things are integrated in the 21st century design concept. So again, that was what we went forward with in high school design, and we're certainly not alone in that. Even in this valley, the newer high schools are coming out with that collaborative space, and so there is an additional square foot per student grossing factor to add that collaborative space.
Our elementaries have that as well. Our new elementaries in Westlake will have that as well. Just the teaching methods.
Don, can I add on to what you said? You've hit on it pretty well. Another element or amenity that Skyline has is they have some teacher collaboration spaces or some teacher workspaces that are spread around Skyline. That's something that's a little bit beyond what Granger had in the program. They are very similar in their program, but there are a few things like that. The student collaboration spaces, there's some teacher workspaces. They're a little bigger and a little more of them at Skyline. And then that testing center is a large space, and it was something that was done in lieu of a lecture hall, but that testing center is a little bit bigger than that lecture hall would have been by a few thousand square feet. Those are, I think, those are the itemized things that are a little bit bigger in Skyline.
Can I go?
Yep, I was looking around to see
who's next. The thing that stands out to me about this that's on screen right now is that, 17 million was added for the index, based on what is going on with the industry, and 17 million was added on for the complexity factor that we hadn't predicted. I do think that there were some change orders that had to do with the community, like you were saying, and mostly I think those were just that it took longer to get to the phase where we could start moving forward. But I think that due to that feedback from our community, everyone I've talked to has said, yeah, the building is going to be a lot better. So I appreciate the efforts that they put in. One thing that I am concerned about is this complexity factor as we move forward with other buildings, because though I know there are things that we can't foresee, I do think that a $17 million worth of complexity that we did not foresee, that makes me nervous for future projects. How do we make sure that we narrow down that risk factor for ourselves? And I don't think we need an answer to that tonight, but I think that's something that we as a district need to find an answer to, is are there any other things we can do to narrow that down? Because since I've been close to the building situation at Skyline, I know there are a ton of things that have happened that we just, like a pipe that was under the ground and we didn't know it was there and nobody knew and it wasn't documented anywhere. And, I don't know how we would find that in advance. But I think that anything we can do to recognize this problem and find ways to lessen the risk, I think of course we ought to do. And we know that, but I just want to point to that.
Thank you. We won't go down the list, but I can tell you the number one biggest indicator is if you're building on site with an active site. We aren't at Westlake. We didn't at South Kearns, right? We moved kiddos. Elsewhere, only Walker is a clean site. Cypress is a clean site. That is the number one money saver and time saver right there, is if you can build that. And Mitch is now the principal up there, and we've talked about that. What would it do to the community, the school community, if you had to bus kids to concerts somewhere else, or if you had to, those were all things the board decided, and it does tear that school apart. And so I think the decision was that we don't do that, but it comes at a cost and time and money.
And I want to speak to that. So, I went up and did a tour of the building up there, And one of the things that was my purpose in going up there was to see how are students being affected by this construction. And my assessment was that there's terrible parking and that they have to take some of their art classes in the relos. Otherwise, their lives are the same. They can't even hear, you can't even hear construction on the inside. And I posted that on social media saying, Skyline, how is this impacting you? And every person who responded said, it's not affecting my kid at all except parking. And so that, I thought that was really good feedback to know that. And Skyline, if you're listening and you disagree, then send me a message, because I don't know. Speaking to that too, when I was there, one of the things that someone pointed out to me that then it did make me ask questions about is there's this whole area that's going to be the tennis courts and the soccer fields and the softball fields that we are planning on, that right now is being used for staging. Most of those fields could be used in spring sports. And so my question is, I know that time is money. Could we save money and move that up and have that done by this spring or earlier instead of in a year from this spring? Because it seems like a rather large staging area.
It is, and no, we can't save money by doing that. We have shifted gears, and the plan that we have in place right now is that all those trailers that you and I talked about and you saw will be moved over the Christmas break so that in January, that whole area is vacated and they continue. You saw them working over in the softball, but then they will move over in the tennis and the other areas, and they will expedite that sooner rather than later. And in essence, the reason it was that way to begin with was safety. Safety is our number one paramount, right? We got to keep kiddos and patrons safe. And Hughes was striving very hard, as nobody wants any issues or accidents or harm to come to anybody. So that's the reason it was that way. But we are moving that forward, and that will happen starting, it's already started. The faculty parking opened up in August was part of that phasing, so we start to shift things around and make all that happen. It's a big ship, and it takes a bit to turn it around, right? So we are doing that, but it's not a quick overnight solution.
So what's the projected timeline on those right now?
Yeah, Julian, I hate speaking for the contractor, but I can tell you they're not going to be able to get off of that area that they're mobilized and be able to mobilize down at the south end of the site in time to have it done and get everything built out for this coming spring. But it is all coming in the spring of the next spring, so it'd be the spring of 2023.
Oh, so you're telling me the spring of 2023 was already the moved up date?
That's correct. You're right. It was going to be.
Oh, I see.
It was going to be.
Well, that's disappointing.
Okay.
I was hoping we could move that up even faster.
Okay.
It is a very nice building. I think it's really well thought out.
Well, the amount of work that they've got to do over there, it is something that they won't be able to get it done for spring. We have pinned them down to March 1st of 23.
All right, good discussion so far. Chris, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. So for the Cypress build, do you have a timeline that looks like this yet? So we could know phase,
No, we don't.
Okay.
And what's happening, we're in the contractor, Westland, is in the scheduling, the deep scheduling. So they gave us some sample schedules, and that's what's going to, they're really doing what they call a push or a pull schedule to get things done. What you're going to find is Cypress isn't a phased build, right? It's one site. They're just building in all areas of the building, and one area is not going to be complete before the other.
it's all going to be
It's all just going to kind of come together at the end, right? Okay. There's going to be a skeleton, kind of throughout the site. Then walls are going to start to go in, sheetrock, and it all just kind of grows organically as one very large building. So you're not going to see it this phase, then this phase, then this phase. It's going to be kind of a not done
it's good. Okay.
kind of build.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other questions? You have two more questions? Julie.
Okay, so on the first, Terry's kicking me to get my questions done. Can you go back to the first slide that, Ben, on the slideshow? We saw that the cost escalations fluctuate up and down a lot, and I'm not sure if I'm reading that graph exactly correctly, or this. Yes, this. On the slide before that, you don't have to go to it, but it said that there's a projected increase of 10% in the next year or two. So on the next slide now, does this mean that here we're at the 2021, the upper percentage is 10%? That's saying that moved to 20%?
No, what it's saying is in 2022, expect another 10% on top of that. In 2023, expect another 10% on top of that.
Okay.
So we're on a high impact stage in construction. As reflected, Dave Hart, remember the economist was projecting that this supply chain issue and these complexities won't unwind until 2024, 2025. That's going to be reflected in future bids where that indice is just going to climb. So what I'm signaling with that statement, if you think a delay is going to save you money, in this climate, the delay will cost you money. Okay, so it's not just for future projects, but for any delays, we're just going to add on 9, 10, 11, 12, 13%. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13% each time a year goes by.
Okay.
So typically, we see anywhere between 4 and 5% for an average year for escalation. So if you look at the first 4 or 5 from 2010 to about 2016 or so, those are pretty much what you would expect, and it's based on market conditions, so the law of supply and demand. What's happening now is we're still seeing that, plus we're having all these supply chain issues, and so the demand is much higher and the supply is much lower, and so the cost is rising. And that'll happen next year, whether it's 10% or 12% or 8%, we don't know, or we can guess, and the economists are saying expect the same as, pretty much this year. But they're also saying that if things don't sort themselves out here in the next couple of months, we could end higher than 10%. And so it's just a matter of watching month to month as to where the economy's going and what's happening at the docks and what's happening on the roads. And I've heard stories of truck drivers showing up at a construction site. They have nowhere to put the material, and so they either have to drop their trailer and leave, or they have to sit there. And if they're sitting there, they're not getting another load, they're not moving it, so that impacts the supply chain. So all of these things compound themselves. So it's a kind of a messed up system right now.
My last question.
We have reached the last question.
My last, it may not be everyone else's
That's
last, is really for Dave. I'm wondering, I just would like to understand better how this affects our capital fund in the long run. I know that we have enough cash that we'll be able to remain cash positive through this next 4 years with this increase. That's been indicated to me, but can you give me any other information about how this impacts, say, future projects, which are very much on, I think, all of our minds as we talk about this. We recognize that it impacts future projects. So can you speak to that at all?
There will have to be a shift in the projects. As the early projects cost more, you're going to have to move some back because there won't be those funds available. We will, over the coming years, still make that shift to capital outlay, which will continue to give us more dollars into the future. But some of those smaller projects that you have now will have to move back.
Say a little bit.
Yeah.
Don has
Hold the microphone up closer. I'm having a hard time hearing you, Dave.
Go ahead. Don has the calendar on that, I believe.
Yeah. So working with our new budget director, Brian Ibsen. So Mitch Robinson, Brian and I, and Justin have been going through a series of transition meetings, right? I mean, these are complex issues, and Mitch needs to dump 30 years worth of knowledge at Brian, and then we take that, drinking from a fire hose as well. And we're remodeling that bond rollout based upon changes that we've seen in some hard bids, right? And based upon what we're now seeing in the new revenues coming in. So we don't have the details on that, and we would like to come back to the board when we feel comfortable with our numbers and our models and report back to you on what that cash flow and capital outlay really is. We started to engage in some model rewrites, and we've been doing that. We didn't feel comfortable coming tonight with that information. We know that you sent an email with that, and we would have presented something that was materially flawed and didn't feel comfortable with that. Our intent is to come back in one of these construction monthlies and say, okay, we reconfigured our models based upon what we're seeing in construction now, what we're going to project using these indices, and what we're seeing as our revenue flow. From last year's November report, remember we were presuming a series of projects were pushing 7 to 9 years. That was kind of where we were pushing. We're hopeful we can keep that 7 to 9 year push. But we're engaging in a series of models. We want to run a slightly more conservative revenue projection model and see where that takes us. A very aggressive model shows that we're holding our own. But I think just looking at some tea leaves here, we'll be lucky to hold our own. We might see a couple of, as Dave indicated, some of the smaller projects. And then, of course, we also are looking at some tightening over the next couple of years. We kind of have what we call our bond revenue, right? Which is no longer a bond, but is incoming new capital. And then we have the floor, which was our standard capital that we would run on. We're using some savings out of standard capital to act as reserves in case something goes upside down on us. So we're doing some of our tightening right now to hopefully have some reserves in place should we need them in the next 4 or 5 years. And depending upon the need for the reserves, we can either re-inject that in advanced projects or just cover what we need to cover on our current capital outlay. Again, we're trying to hold the line on costs, but we're not so unwise as to think we shouldn't have a savings account to handle that. So we want to bring back some forecasts. They're just not good yet. We just don't feel comfortable with our model.
Well, and as you look at those, and thank you so much for the work you're doing, and I totally understand not wanting to present information that isn't really quite fully baked yet. I just want to say that I feel like we welcome the idea of seeing both the conservative model and the, moving forward as, in all ideal conditions model and the in-between model, seeing how it could look in many different scenarios is really helpful, because otherwise the expectations get set. Mm-hmm. and knowing that it could be any of these, and is helpful.
Clark?
Yeah, one more comment from me, hopefully the last one. I have some foundational concerns about this, given that I was not part of the board that voted on some of these issues 2 years ago, or even further back than that. And it relates a little bit to some of the things that Terry talked about in terms of the community wants versus needs. And I'm very concerned foundationally that Skyline is being built with a capacity of anywhere from 2,400 to 2,700 students, but only 1,100 students approximately live within that Skyline boundary, and only approximately 1,500 to 1,600 students who attend Skyline come from within our district boundaries. And we have 25% of a student body who comes to that school who are not part of our tax base to raise those capital funds for that school. I'm worried that there's a foundational disconnect between the needs and the wants for that school that concerns me from a fiscal responsibility standpoint as a board, and from addressing the needs that other students and communities in our district have, as alluded to by the fact that we're pushing many of these capital projects out even further. So I appreciate that we're in a tough situation with 30 to 60 day timelines on bids, but I'm also not convinced that there's not some other mitigating alternative here with respect to a school that's being built to 2,400 to 2,700 students that seems overreaching. at best.
I'll take that one a little bit. So, to me, I consider it 2,400, Clark. I don't consider it 2,700. 2,700 is the principal getting extremely creative with wraparound schedules and all that. So in my mind, 2,700 really isn't on the table. It's for 2,400. I hear your concern with outside district, students coming. However, I do know that high schools function on enrollment, because if they don't have enough enrollment, then all your elective programs are in jeopardy. And so Skyline has always functioned on letting those out-of-district kids come in so that their extracurricular programs can thrive. And because if you get, and this is true with any school, if you get enrollment that's too low, you've got to teach the core subjects, right? I mean, that is required for graduation in a high school level. So those are non-negotiable, and then all of a sudden your full-time educator ratios your FTE. Unfortunately, you start to get into the arts and things like that have to be cut. And so Skyline has always thrived on having extra kids there to support those programs, because if you did only have 1,600, that would be a huge hit to that Skyline school programmatically. That community would, that student community would really feel the effects of very limited programs, if that makes any sense. So I hear your concern on one hand with the taxpayer. I'm just giving the other perspective that those programs to function, there is a threshold level for that. And we have the principal of Skyline here. He's over here nodding. I don't know if you can see him. Terry, comment to that?
The prior board did discuss that. We had that concern, are we building too big? But Skyline has always been very successful in bringing those students in and consistent over the years. And so as that prior board, we did feel comfortable about building that Skyline out at 2,400. So we did have that conversation, Clark.
I appreciate that. It's still 15%, even at 2,400 students. It's still 15% above current population, which is still concerning. Where we're in a situation where we are so over budget, it just further exacerbates the problem in terms of a perceived overbuild, at least in my perception.
Okay, great conversation. This is an action vote. Tonight, we do need to decide if we're willing to increase the spending, the approval budget. Let me try that again. If we want to do a budget approval for Skyline, if I can spit this out, as 173 million. We just say 174 million, or does it need to be the specific number?
Rounding up is appropriate.
Okay. If we're ready to, I'll accept a motion.
I motion that we approve the new budget for Skyline High at 174 million.
Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second on the table to approve the budget for Skyline rebuild to be $174 million. Any further comments or questions before the vote? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
All right, so for the record, we have a vote that passes that on a 6-1 vote, with Clark Nelson being the nay vote. I want a 10-minute recess. Can we take a 10-minute recess before?
Are we approving Cypress also?
No.
You did that at your last, 2 board meetings ago.
Yeah,
Cypress has been approved.
Yeah.
So that number has.
Cypress was just part for I think for reference to, since we're building the two. All right, let's reconvene at 7 p.m. for our last 2 agenda items.
The sound on the live stream has been turned back on. It was muted there, just a heads up.
Yeah, we got one more. Yeah. Told you. It may be next month.
Terry, it's 6:59 on my iPad. All right, we're going to call this meeting back to order. Thank you for indulging us in a little bit of a break after that long conversation. Okay, this is called irony. Mr. Terry Bodden wanted the meeting to start, and then he's the one that's still talking.
Excuse me, Mr. Bodden, are you prepared to start the meeting?
All right, we're going to resume our board meeting now. Once again, it's Tuesday, October 19th, where we've already been called to order. So we're going to go on with our next item on the agenda, which is Granite Park Junior additional hard service update. Are you taking this one, Justin? Don, who's doing this?
We're happy to.
All right.
This is a rather simple, we hope, purchase, and it's being advanced to this meeting because, as you may have heard, refugee resettlement in Utah is fast approaching. Granite Park has traditionally been an area of settlement or resettlement for refugee populations. We want to get ahead of the game on the hard surface that will most likely be needed to bring a relocatable in. Our infrastructure takes longer to construct than the resettlement process, and so we're pretty confident that we're going to need this additional hard surface to the rear of the school where the relocatables are at, and we just wanted to bring it to you in advance of the November meeting, mainly to beat as much weather as humanly possible and to execute on this hard surface so we can be prepared for what we deem as the inevitable increase in population at Granite Park.
All right, this is a lot more straightforward. So
Yes.
With that, I'll entertain a motion.
I motion that we accept the proposal for the bid for the concrete.
Granite Park Junior.
I'll second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second on the table for the approval of the Granite Park Junior High additional hard surface bid. Any concerns or questions, board members? All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Whew, that was easy. Okay, next we're going on to our final action item vote and agenda item of the evening, which is precinct boundary adjustments. Ben, does somebody want to go through the census and why this is being done at this time?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so, and we just have a very few brief slides here. I just wanted to also introduce Steve Hogan here, whose department helped produce the maps and work through this process. As you are all likely aware, as part of the United States Constitution, every 10 years there is a census taken, and that determines the amount of representation and balances out things. Dawn, are you okay? All right.
Dawn,
I'm a little worried. Is he crying or is he laughing? Okay.
Laughing
any
and
case,
limping, that is.
We rebalance things to ensure that within Granite School District, all 7 board precincts are balanced and under the guidance provided under state statute and the federal constitution. So with respect to that, there are standard objectives cited in Utah State Code. I'm not going to go into each of these in detail. If you have questions, feel free to let me know. But obviously, we were given census data by the local county to reference, and Steve and his team went to kind of make adjustments with respect to some potential possibilities of how we could rebalance the precincts based on that data. There's a couple of other factors here. Obviously, race can not be used as a predominant factor in drawing lines. The goal is always to preserve, where possible, specific communities of interest. I'll get into that in a second here. Furthermore, each district should be contiguous, meaning that no part of the district can be entirely separate from the remainder of the district. Compactness, trying to avoid odd shapes or weird designs that can't be explained reasonably. And then obviously following some natural, geographic, or man-made features lends itself to ease of understanding those boundaries. Preserving cores of prior districts, we already talked about that a little bit, and minimizing the division of municipalities when there are crossovers between political boundaries, and cannot have a purposeful or undue favoring or disfavoring of an incumbent elected official, a candidate or prospective candidate for elected office. So despite Terry Bodden trying to bribe me on several occasions, I put that all asunder, and we've tried to do the best we can to balance those appropriately. That being said, as part of that process, we did receive data given to us the mid part of September. This has been a convoluted and consolidated timeline. This is usually about a year-long process, but the census coming in the midst of a global pandemic put them way behind in terms of the federal government providing us the data. And then locally, you can see that process being played out on several fronts. Our lines are approved, our boundaries are approved by the local county council. And so as part of that process, our team created, GIS team created those maps. We then took some of those maps and provided them to you and gave you opportunities to provide feedback and some comments with respect to that. We will then take those later next week to the county council and submit them a final map, as it were. They will then decide based on that same criteria. They're not going to approve it right there and then. They're going to accept those recommendations from this board and then make their own decisions, make a recommendation to the county council, who will then make the final decision. And it's important to understand that those approved precinct boundaries come into effect in 2 different ways. For the sake of the election process, those maps will immediately come into effect. So those who would file to run for re-election or for election in March of 2022, they would be running in those new boundaries. However, for you incumbent individuals, you would continue to represent your current boundaries through the end of 2022. When the new elected officials take office, that would complete the process for implementation. So with that, we have 2 different maps here. One, they're the same map, but they show the process of those changes. And I'm going to kind of blow this up just a little bit and move us around so we can kind of see where the predominant changes occurred. I'm going to go west to east because that's how it pulled me up initially. And
Ben, can I just make a comment?
Please.
Quick? One thing that's really surprised me is how often I get people who will contact me from, some area that is not within my precinct and say, I know that I'm not in your precinct, but, here's something for you to know. And I just want to make sure that it's clear that we make sure the voice of our precinct is being heard, but we represent and vote on what's best for the entire district. And so we care about all of that district, not just those within our precinct.
Yeah, it's a very astute point to be made that the board represents the district as an entire entity, not just one precinct or area. I would tell you that we've done, through this process, I'm particularly proud of the way that we've been able to delineate the lines along very natural geographic boundaries. That's one thing that was really important. It'll be really easy for the redistricting committee and finally the county council to approve this recommended map because of how cleaned up things have been. You can see the lined portions show the shifts from the current boundaries to the new proposed boundaries. Nicole McDermott there on the bottom would receive a portion of the southwest part that was previously or is currently in Chris Wynn's district. And there's a very strange boundary on the west side of Chris Wynn on the border between Chris and Terry that would come into Terry's section. I surmised 10 years ago, I remember going through this process, that was a minor adjustment made by the redistricting committee based on current voting precincts at that time. So it'll be remain to be seen if that is something that they accept or not. You can also see in Terry's area, he would pick up the remaining portion of Jacqueline Elementary. That would move north into his area. And while the entirety of Farnsworth, Rolling Meadows, and Pioneer would move in their entirety over to Karen's precinct, kind of cleaning up those boundaries themselves. Karen would lose Western Hills to Chris, but there's a kind of a natural geographic piece that fits better with Chris's precinct than it does in Karen's. And then you would see an adjustment of Arcadia and portions of Truman that would come over to offset and balance out Nicole McDermott and Karen. Connie would lose a portion of Redwood, and that in its entirety would shift over to Terry. And then just some minor cleanup on the boundaries, making it a little more fluid and cleaner, making the southeast portion of that boundary just all the way along that street, and then pulling a portion of Mill Creek Elementary into Julie's precinct, again, to balance out those numbers. And you can see those numbers at the bottom there, and you've all had a chance to look at this a little bit in depth. So the other map is just a clean version of the new proposed map. We did try to, and Steve can speak to this, we utilized maps that showed the elementary boundaries because that's where the basis of our feeders start, right? And the high school boundaries are tied to those, and the junior high boundaries are by and large tied to those as well. Again, as we take this map to the redistricting committee, they'll balance that out, reshape the voting precincts based on all of these new lines that are being drawn for legislative seats, county seats, and all those other pieces that go into this. And they will make some minor adjustments to this if they do. We hope we've given them a map that requires very little adjustment. And at the end of the day, they could obviously throw that out and start from scratch and do what they choose to do. We hope that this has given them some viable options. So with that, unless Steve, did I miss anything?
I don't think so. Good explanation. It's just some of these, if you were to look at the census map and compare it to our boundaries, of course, a census district or some of those smaller areas are not quite so straight as some of our other boundaries. And so I think our numbers are pretty dang close, but like Ben said, I think we've done a nice job of trying to get it as balanced as we can. I'll be surprised but not shocked if they make some minor adjustments, but I think we're in the ballpark of what the statute calls for.
Hey, real quick, Ben, on the other slide, I didn't realize this, I apologize. I don't know if you have to show this when you take it in, but you did not include that area that is now going over to Connie from my area.
Can you speak in your microphone? Sorry.
You didn't include on the other slide the area that Connie is picking up from me.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I don't know if you need to show that as you take that to that area of Vista and
Vista and Taylorsville High, right?
It's not hatched. You're right.
Taylorsville and Plymouth.
Right here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, just explaining there, you know that area there between Vista, Taylorsville, Plymouth, that has been your area, Nicole.
Yeah, that is
but,
not shown on there.
Yeah, it's just not hatched and with the.
Yeah, I don't know if you have to take that to them to show them, oh, that's changing, or I just.
Yeah, we can fix that.
I didn't catch that before, so I apologize.
This was after probably the 12th, 14th, 15th iteration that maybe one was left out, so.
Thank you for pointing that out. So just again, for the record's sake, there is a portion of this area that is currently within Nicole's precinct that would go shift over to Connie's precinct.
Right, from 13th West, I took 13th West East, and she took 13th West to 48th South, and then it was all mine from 48th South North.
Would you mind just resending that out
Sure.
to
Yeah,
the board
be
so
glad
we
to.
can actually have the current one downloaded, so we
Yep,
can
we'll get that out
reference
tomorrow.
Yeah, perfect.
And we'll make sure that's part of the board report that gets published to the web.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for your work on this. I know this has been a lot of hours delineating all these numbers. And if you look at those population numbers, Ben, I don't know if you can zoom in on, sorry, Ben, you thought you could run away. If you could zoom in on those numbers, I think that's important for people to see that they're relatively balanced. The average population per precinct for 2020 is 58,655. And if you just kind of scroll down, there's some that are a couple thousand over or under from that, but by and large, they're very balanced. And on the percentage across, the biggest difference is 1.4%. So that to me, those numbers show that you've done an incredible amount of work and really good work at that to get them that close and that balance. So thanks for your whole team for the hours on this, and we look forward to putting this forward.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, so with that, I'll look for a motion that we can approve this as our official recommendation. Like I said, like Ben referenced, we don't get a pick at the end of the day because that's on the county council, but we can put forth our recommendation, our recommended precinct map. Any motions?
I'll move that we recommend the map for the redistricting, is that correct word?
Yep.
For the submission to the county council.
I'll second that.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to approve this existing map as our official recommendation for precinct boundaries for the 2020 census. Any further questions or concerns? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion passes unanimously. Rich, did you have anything to add at the end of the meeting before we adjourn? All right. Woohoo! I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.